Good evening. Welcome to City Limits. This program is now 1 hour long, and for good reason. Thanks to the facilities of the University of Montana Telecommunications Center, we'll be able to take your phone calls tonight. We understand that we do have some transmission difficulties with the cable, so it may be a less quality than we would all like to have, but we'd like you to stick with us until 8 o'clock. I'm Mayor Dan Kemmis, and tonight our program is about the effect the war in the Persian Gulf is having on our lives here in Missoula. Joining me tonight are Suzanne Abelfadel, a representative of the Jeanette Rankin Peace Resource Center, and Charlie Brown, District 5 Commander of the American Legion. On last month's program, we said the topic of tonight's show would be winter sports in Missoula. We'll deal with that subject next month. But the war is a dominating factor in our lives tonight, and we should spend an hour together talking about it. To set the stage for tonight's program, the City Limits staff has produced a mini-documentary. Reporter Lisa Fairbanks reviews now what the people of Missoula have been doing for the past 4 weeks since Operation Desert Storm began.
It was noon in Missoula, 2 hours earlier than in Washington, D.C., but both cities, and the ones in between, could feel that January 15th had come. More than 2,000 people gathered at the University of Montana Main Hall. They were there to share mixed emotions for the country and for its troops in the Persian Gulf, all waiting for the United Nations deadline.
What do we want? Peace! When do we want it? Now!
They continued the rally across campus and over the footbridge, blocking traffic on Broadway until all 2,000 people arrived on the lawn of the courthouse. The demonstrators spoke, prayed, and sang. Many would stay on the lawn, hoping for an 11th hour agreement that would avoid war. But the deadline came and went. Late in the afternoon of the 16th, America was at war.
As of 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq.
That was a bomb that came down fairly near our hotel. We don't know how near, but you can feel it shaking the building a little bit as it came down. There's still more traces.
Cable News Network brought the war from a hotel in Baghdad into our homes with frenzied phone reports. 24-hour coverage kept people around the world glued to their television sets. The next evening, nearly 7,000 people left their television sets to congregate in Dahlberg Arena for the Idaho-Montana basketball game. It was the university's night in the national spotlight because ESPN was covering the game. Many Missoulians who didn't go to the game stayed in front of their TVs, changed the channel to ESPN, and waited for the Grizzly game to begin. The campus had been rife with rumors that activists would disrupt the game. A member of the Student Coalition for Social Responsibility, a UM Peace activist group, went to the university officials to ask that a statement of the coalition's concern about the war be read before the game, in return for an agreement that any planned demonstrations would be called off. But some members of the coalition denied that they were part of that agreement.
As we get set to start, there have been peace demonstrations all day in the Missoula area, and we had heard rumors that they were going to try and disrupt this game tonight. And you can see the police or extra security here in Missoula are taking now we've got potatoes being hurled at these well-meaning men and women. They are being forcibly removed from the court. The crowd is chanting USA, and we have a very, very disturbing situation here, Terry. At the start of this game, this country is in a full-scale war in the Persian Gulf, and we certainly...
Well, I think while we all hope for peace, we certainly right now, the best way to get our folks home and to get peace is to support those folks who are over there in the Gulf.
These pictures were played on television stations across the U.S., and actions of the university students in the die-in, as well as the reaction of the police officers, were both praised and criticized. How that demonstration affected local divisive opinions on the war is hard to say, but the people learned who the coalition was. Several Missoulians decided that the troops in the Gulf needed a different message, and these appeared everywhere around Missoula. The American Legion has distributed more than 100,000 yellow ribbons to tie around tree trunks and on car antennas. The Legion, Veterans Center, and other concerned citizens have formed Operation Support. It has brought crowds in the hundreds together at the Vietnam Veteran Memorial for the past 3 Friday nights. The message here is the same one sent by the Yellow Ribbons: total support of the troops and the reason they are there.
On any given day, Montana has about 10,000 men and women on active duty. So we know we will be doing our share in service to the country in Saudi Arabia.
Polls indicate that 80% of the people in America feel that our president did everything that he could, short of war, to fulfill the United Nations resolutions. There's a small handful of people that are protesting that. But many of us have fought, and many others have died for those few to protest.
As these demonstrators united in Missoula to give thanks and support to troops in the Gulf, 80 other demonstrators were riding buses to San Francisco, where they would rally to bring the troops home. About 200,000 demonstrators, representing almost every U.S. city, gathered to protest the war. Montana's peace marchers were from Missoula, Helena, and surrounding towns. After 2 days of demonstrations and workshops, and despite a 24-hour ride home, the peace activists' spirits were high as they came off the bus. Coalition leader Jim Parker said the size of the demonstration, communication in the workshops, and lack of negative response to protests show that there is public support for their movement.
So it really reaffirms our commitment to what we're doing in a real strong way, in a real positive way. And we want to be able to share that with the people up here in our commitment and in a very personal way from what we've learned down there.
Those involved in Operation Support believe the only positive way to handle this war is not to refute America's involvement, but to have pride in it. Their rally set aside a certain amount of time for people to speak who have loved ones fighting in Operation Desert Storm. Tom Burrows has 2 sons stationed in the Persian Gulf. He says that America is not in the war by choice, but by duty.
None of us wants war. No sane, compassionate person ever wants war. It is horrible beyond belief and brings pain and suffering to all of us. Yet when all else fails, it is the final alternative that must be used by courageous people everywhere.
Operation Support member Gary Marbett spearheads yellow flag distribution in Missoula and surrounding towns. Marbett prepared this flag for flying under the U.S. flag at the state capitol in Helena. Larry Westfall is the Command Sergeant Major of the Montana Army National Guard in Helena. His 20-year-old son Jason is a Marine in Saudi Arabia. Jason saw a tape of the ESPN protest.
People have their right to have their own opinions about the political aspects of this. But when the soldiers see that, they don't think about that. They think that the Missoula or Montana is not supporting the soldiers. And that's what hurt.
Have mercy on us.
The people who assemble at the Friday night rallies in Rose Park are there to make sure that any negative feelings those soldiers might have be lightened by approval and blessing from home. At the second week's rally, parents and family members had a chance to send video messages to troops.
This is for my son, ASAN Sean Meager, aboard the USS Saratoga. I love you, Sean. We miss you. We're so very proud of what you're doing. We want you to know we're 100% behind of everything. We love you.
My son, Gerard K. Hagel, E5 with A Company, 12th Engineer Battalion in Desert Shield. I just want to tell him we love him.
We are his mom and dad, Martha and Ed Hagel, out of Frenchtown, Montana. Thank you.
We're anxious to have everybody home.
However, the peace movement says its goal is to bring sons, nephews, daughters, and parents back from the Middle East now. At a meeting last Monday, the coalition planned for a national call to action February 21st. That day, peace groups across the U.S., with endorsements from student groups in other countries, will remind people in their communities about the violence and destruction of war. The coalition will offer what Parker calls alternative education about the Middle East, and hold rallies and marches against America's involvement there. A spokesman for the coalition, J.V. Bennett, says it believes that while support and respect should go out to the soldiers involved in the war, the U.S. should have used nonviolent means to liberate Kuwait.
I think we got scammed. Like I said earlier, Bush is blackmailing the American people in Congress by putting them over there in the first place and then retroactively asking for approval. I respect the decision that the people in the armed forces have made. The men and women who have gone into the armed forces have made a pledge, a commitment to risk their lives to protect this nation. I respect that pledge. I honor that pledge. And I think it's criminal that President Bush has taken advantage of that pledge and put them in a situation in which they have to risk their lives, and it's a situation in which they're not really protecting their country.
So the feelings of pro-support and pro-immediate peace continue to simmer in Missoula. In an effort to unite the community, the University Athletic Department planned a rally around the flag night at last Saturday's basketball game. Athletic Director Bill Moose said his staff planned the event to refute negative feelings from the ESPN game, but the coalition objected to newspaper ads for the event. The group said it had been promised by University President George Dennison that no further political actions would be made at sporting or public events. Moose said he didn't believe any apology or alteration of the ads was necessary.
The intention was not political in any way. There's in any of the advertising and promotions that never once refers to the war, to the troops, to the political aspect of what the country's involved with right now. It was just primarily, hey, regardless of what your feelings are concerning this situation, we are all Americans. Let's show our support to the families and those people themselves, whether they want to be there or not, or whatever, that we hope that they'll come back safe and unharmed.
Lance Corporal.
So the war continues, and the war of feelings in Missoula continues. But both sides are concerned not only with the politics of war, but also of its human suffering.
Corporal Steve Binslin. Corporal David T. Snyder. Lance Corporal Michael E. Linderman. Lance Corporal Frank C. Allen. Corporal Ismail Cato. James T. Stevenson. Lance Corporal Dion Stevenson's son.
Peter Swan, Jeffrey Olson, Jonathan Edwards, James Hopkins, Albert Dodd, David Eric, Daniel Walker, Eric Heaton.
May this benediction heal the wounds of war, bind up the bitterness of painful divisions, and mend broken hearts and failed friendships.
Those lists of men and women killed or missing in action and taken prisoner may soon become too long to read aloud. Those of us who rally on either side, indeed all citizens who care about events in the Gulf, have that same dread. In this review of the past 4 weeks, we've seen that it's difficult for people with strong opinions to understand the rationale behind opposing points of view. And it's even more difficult when those opposing views turn into actions that other people find offensive. Even if the war in the Persian Gulf can't be settled soon, perhaps the local battle of misunderstanding can be reduced in this town. Reporting for City Limits, I'm Lisa Fairbanks.
This is a live broadcast from the University of Montana. Because of the technical difficulties that we've had this evening, our show is going to be shorter than we had anticipated, and it may be that some of you are not receiving the kind of television reception that you would like to have this evening. But we would like to ask you to join us now for a call-in program about the effect of the war in the Persian Gulf on Missoula society. If you are able to hear us this evening, give us a call at 243-2715 and we'll visit with you. My guests here in the studio are Suzanne Abelfadel and Charlie Brown. And what we would like to speak about this evening is what's happening in Missoula. What has the war done to Missoula? A month ago, we did a show here just before the bombing started, and some of us talked about what we thought would happen, and our prediction was that if war came, that it would divide Missoula, it would make things very tough here. I think it's done that, but I'm interested in what the two of you, from your different perspectives, see happening in Missoula. Charlie, what do you think's going on here?
I think there are quite a few things, Dan, that are worth mentioning. I agreed with the statement of the gentleman that said probably 80% of the people are in support of the troops, are doing everything in their power to show the people that are in the Persian Gulf that they are supported by their community. I believe that a great deal of this is a direct result of the Vietnam War and the Vietnam generation, when 80% said nothing and basically allowed the Vietnam veterans to suffer the pangs and arrows of a mindless war. And the people that said nothing at that time want to be sure that the soldiers this time know that they are well supported in their communities and in their nation. And I think it goes a bit further. They also realize the losses and the frustration and heart-rending problems that the families are suffering. And for the most part, the Missoula community has been very, very supportive of those troops. As the person mentioned that was doing the broadcast, over 100,000 yellow ribbons have been given out in Missoula already, and countless other types of symbolism of support for the troops and their families are shown all over Missoula.
Suzanne, from the perspective of the Jeanette Rankin Peace Resource Center, how do you see what's happening in Missoula during these weeks?
Well, it has been, particularly on January 16th when the firing started, a very tense time. I think we were all extremely tense, whether we favored military intervention or didn't. Everyone was tense leading up to that deadline. Since then, I don't have a survey. I would say that whether those of us who do not support military intervention in the Gulf, whether people do or do not, I would say concern for men and women serving there is virtually universal. I think I'm very aware of what Charlie's saying about the treatment of the Vietnam vets when they were over in Vietnam and when they came back and what they had to face, and I know it was a very painful thing. And the dilemma is for those of us who oppose the war, we feel very strongly that it's important to keep speaking out against a policy that we feel didn't attempt very seriously to use nonviolent means, and at the same time to be supportive of the people who will have to fight that war.
Okay. We've got a caller. Let's see if this works. Hello, do we have a caller with a question?
Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I have a question about how this is coming back to our home and affecting us people in Montana. Up in the Badger and Two Medicine Wilderness areas, we have the Blackfeet Indians up there who are automatically deemed allies of the United States of America and have people over there fighting and dying for this war. Yet at the same time, our government is coming onto their lands and raping the oil and gas and eliminating a pre-Columbian or pre-Cambrian culture up there. Also, there's 14 new oil and gas drilling proposals in the Blackleaf Canyon, which is 20 miles south.
We're having trouble hearing you. Can you either speak louder, or perhaps we'll try to get you back on the lines with a little bit better result?
Well, can you hear me better now?
Not well enough, I think, that it's going to go out over the television. Okay. We'll try to get another caller on here and see if that works. But let's get back to this, what seems to me to be a very difficult issue. Suzanne, you were saying that you think that people who oppose the policy in the Gulf really do fairly universally want to show support for the soldiers who are, and other servicemen and women who are there. Is that the way that you see it?
Right, yeah, and I think that is a major point of contention between those of us who support and those who do not, feeling that it's disloyal perhaps to, once this fighting starts, to oppose the war that's going on. I mean, I think our position is that that this war resembles many previous wars in that the public does not have full information on what's going on behind the scenes. I think the public is much more sophisticated than it used to be, judging from letters to the editors. People write in about the hypocrisy they see in supporting opposing Saddam Hussein when last August he was one of our allies, when some of our present allies, like Assad of Syria, Assad and Hussein are soul brothers when it comes to human rights abuses, I would say. I mean, this is true generally. Our policies in Central America support dictatorships also guilty of human rights abuses. So I think that what we're concerned with is having policy that is truly responsive to human rights abuses, and it is not geared towards establishing spheres of influence for economic reasons, for reasons of exploiting resources and so on.
Charlie, how does it appear from a soldier's perspective? You're a Vietnam vet yourself.
I'm a Vietnam-era veteran.
Okay, Vietnam-era veteran. So how does this issue play out from the perspective of a veteran?
I think it plays out quite differently than what Suzanne is portraying. If you are in a combat situation, or even if you are rear echelon, it makes really no difference. The point is that most veterans who see what the veterans are seeing in the peace demonstrations, it hurts them deeply. They are already confronted with a very stressful situation, and to not see that open support from the people of our country leads them to believe that there is some intangible factor. I think one person on one of the Americas shows mentioned the fact that he remembered the messages he received from a friend while he was in Vietnam, and the fact that they were very distressing to him, to the point that he said he was thinking about them on 2 different missions and was nearly killed both times, thinking about what was going on. That's how distressing it can be to a soldier. And frankly, I think this war has engendered something totally different than the previous wars. And I don't think it's because we have a more sophisticated group of people as much as we have a much more aware group of people, in the sense that for the first time, war is focusing on the human element of our servicemen and women. Previous to this, in World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam, it was how many victories did you have? If you watch The World at War, they don't mention the number of troops that were hurt or killed in any given action. They generally talk about the great victory we won here and the great victory we won here. But this war is now focusing on victory, and it's not focusing on the militaristic aspect of that victory. It's focusing on the soldiers and the support for those people that are serving in the Persian Gulf. And I think that's where most people are coming from.
Excuse me. We're not having much luck being able to carry the calls, but we can at least respond to some calls. We have a caller who is asking me to say why I think the media only shows the peace side of the issue. It may depend on who it is or which television channels you watch. I guess that I hadn't felt that that was necessarily the case. Do either of you have any feelings about bias on the part of the media in its coverage of events?
The only bias I've really seen was the coverage of the Grizzly game and the replay on ESPN, which only showed the 9 people being dragged off the floor. And that really, I thought, was the only biased thing, because when I saw this replay time after time, they did not show the fans cheering and chanting for the servicemen and women that were serving in Saudi Arabia as a prelude to what they were showing in the
Do you think that television invites people to behave in ways that they wouldn't otherwise behave? I mean, it seems to me that the die-in was staged for television. Does television affect the way that we manage to talk to each other about something like the war, Suzanne?
I would say so. I mean, I think, for one thing, the people who staged that event did so because they felt it was important to make a statement about a war that they, I mean, it's like wanting to say to as many people at one time as possible, stop business as usual, something horrible is happening in the world. And television is, I mean, you can reach a wide audience that way. The unfortunate thing is that with an event like that, or even with an interview with a news commentator, we're all now being trained to talk in, little bites of information, which sometimes doesn't get, I guess it forces some of us to be a little more succinct, but we hope, but it doesn't get over the whole message.
It seems to me that it also encourages a lot of nonverbal communication, that in fact it's not even the soundbite that's the most important thing on television, it's the view and the image. And so things like the die-in or the yellow ribbons or all kinds of other visually effective things seem to come to the fore, and we have less and less of a real opportunity to talk to each other, it seems to me, and worse than that, to listen to each other.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the other thing I'd like to say about the print media is that as far as not coverage of the peace movement or the opposing groups so per se, but I find that also often it is necessary to go to alternative sources of information to dig out the kind of information I want on what's going on behind the scenes or in the administration. And so
I want to get back for just a minute to the soldiers' view of peace demonstrations and so on. I understand what you're saying. I also think I understand what it is that Suzanne is saying. This is a democracy. That's one of the things that people are proudest about. And supposedly in a democracy, when people disagree with government policy, they not only have a right, but many people would say that as a citizen, that you've got a responsibility to say what you think of that policy. How do you square those two things, Charlie?
Well, I think you square them with the limitations that are put on the civil rights of all individuals that are involved. My personal perspective is if someone is standing at the courthouse carrying a sign that says, "Pray for peace," I think most veterans would agree with a sign like that. When somebody is jumping into the middle of a basketball game and obstructing a basketball game, or jumping into the middle of a street and obstructing traffic, then it begins to infringe on my civil liberties. And that's where I draw the line. I realize that there are some people that will tell you that's an effective way of demonstrating, but in a highly emotionally charged issue like this, what you're asking for is an escalation of the civil disobedience by both sides. When one side jumps in the street, perhaps someone won't stop their car. And then where do you draw the line? I think, for instance, at the university basketball game, the Missoula Police Department handled that situation exceptionally well. They removed the people as quickly as they possibly could. And it may have been a little rougher than some people had liked, but quite frankly, if the students who were just leaning over, when you saw the video, looking as though they were coming out, had come out, we may have had a very serious incident in Missoula.
That's obviously been a concern to me and to many of us in City Hall and above all the police department about how to keep the peace when tensions are as high as they are, and when people want to make a statement, but as you say, you come up to that line where if you make your statement that way, you may invite a nonverbal statement the other that degenerates into violence. I guess that for me it's helpful to think of us all as exercising two different levels of citizenship. We have American citizenship, in which we have different feelings about what's called for, either supporting the troops, everybody seems to agree to that, supporting the policy. Many people feel the policy needs to be supported, and that's how you support the troops. Some people feel that American citizenship calls for speaking out if you don't agree with the policy. But on a whole different level of Missoula citizenship, there's a question of how we keep the peace among ourselves and how we manage to live through the war in a way that doesn't tear this community apart. I wonder if people are able to sort out those two levels of citizenship. I think to a certain extent they do, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I think that has been certainly a major issue among those of us who oppose the policy, that deciding what you do and what kind of statement you make and the effect it will have on the recipient. I mean, because if your point is not just to make a statement but to open a dialogue with the other party, do you want to do something that's going to cut off communication immediately? That's a major question.
We have a caller who asks whether opposition to the war always means we don't support the troops in the Gulf. How would you answer that, Charlie?
I think as a veteran, and I think most veterans would tell you that the old saying that was originally, I think, attributed to Voltaire, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to my death your right to say it. I'm going back to what I said before, and that is that anyone of a peaceful nature stating their opinion, I have no problem with. And I don't think that makes them any less an American than I am. I think that's another extremist end that says, you know, you're not an American unless you believe that everything George Bush has done has been without flaw. I personally support the Persian Gulf policy, but I don't think that everything that George Bush has done has been right. I don't think any of us are that gullible that we believe that everything and every policy, especially leading up to war, could possibly be so succinct and correct that everything was done correctly. But the reality is that to say to someone that you are not an American because you disagree, to me is the Joseph McCarthy syndrome, and it violates everything I believe in as a veteran, and it also violates a trust. And as I said, as long as the people are protesting peacefully and staying within their space, then I have no problem with the protest.
We have a caller with a question for you, Charlie. The caller would like to know whether you believe that Dr. Martin Luther King's civil disobedience during the civil rights movement was legitimate. And I think probably what they're asking there, let's make the question as hard as possible. Civil disobedience really means breaking the law. It means a very selective kind of breaking the law in order to change the law. And in Dr. King's case, always a peaceful breaking of the law. Do you have any response to that?
I do, because I worked on a campaign that was very closely aligned with Dr. King, and the type of peaceful breaking of the law involved, for instance, loading buses with people and saying, all right, we're going to ride these all day and make our point clear. But these people paid their fare, rode the buses, and did nothing that was civilly disobedient in the sense of anything that was a violation of law. Pacifistically, yes, it was a pacifistic way of violating the law, because people, for instance, in Atlanta weren't able to board the buses, but the people were paying their way. They didn't go out in the street and stand in front of the bus, at least that I remember, and I was only involved with two of the things, but I also remember in the King marches, they passed out a brochure that told you specifically that you were not supposed to break any civil laws, and that they would instruct you as to how to, I guess, obstruct them, but not break them. And for instance, the bus routine where you pay for the bus all day and no one can get on.
Suzanne, the name of your center is the Peace Resource Center.
Right.
And I understand that that means, among other things, that you not only stand for peace, but try to be a resource for peacefulness. As Charlie's talking about civil disobedience in the civil rights era and how it is that people were taught to demonstrate, is any of that going on in Missoula?
Yes, I think we see our role in the peace movement as having, very local applications. We are offering a series of classes, workshops right now on nonviolence, both as just a way of being and as a political tactic in the tradition of Gandhi and King and others. We also will be offering a workshop, hopefully a number of workshops on conflict management, which is something that really, it's interesting, has probably been more widely used in business than among peace activists or anyone else, and I think the reason for that is that it's so clearly productive to turn to more useful ways of solving disagreements. And in addition, we want to bring forth information on this conflict. We would like to establish dialogues between people from groups that do not agree and see where we can come together on certain points.
Today is Lincoln's birthday, the 12th of February, and I have thought often, not only today but for the last several weeks, about Abraham Lincoln and the tremendous struggle and the amount of pain that he had during the Civil War, when Americans were turned against each other, not in the relatively mild ways that we see now, but in violence itself. And I think about the ways that Lincoln tried to persuade people to continue to treat one another civilly and politely, and in a way, what he was always doing was looking beyond the war to how we would live together once the war was over. It seems to me in Missoula we've got an obligation to think about that too, not just our attitudes toward the war, but how we will be together after the war. Any advice from either of you to Missoulians about how to behave now so that we can make things work well after the war?
Well, we've created a committee, Mayor, as you well know, which is the SOS Committee, which is support our servicemen and women in the Persian Gulf. And it basically brings together a combination of services for the families as well as those people that are returning. One of the things that was sadly neglected after Vietnam was not only the lack of a welcome home, but the subsequent services that were needed for veterans. We know there are veterans that or servicemen and women now that are in Saudi Arabia that will see heavy combat in all probability. Those people are going to need a loving hand not only when they come home, but also in subsequent months and perhaps years. We're setting up and trying to organize the services for those people. We're trying to make everyone well appraised of the things that servicemen and women may go through.
Suzanne, do you have any advice or thoughts about how Missoulians might handle things now with an eye toward the end of the war?
One thing that I have tried to focus on since the war began is those aspects of our culture and society that I think lead toward the kind of tragedy we have in the Gulf right now, and so what I'm focusing on is what I've already mentioned: new ways of dealing with conflict, new ways of achieving social change, and learning, much more to break stereotypes about other cultures. For example, in this case, Arabs and Muslims. I think we need to do a great deal about international education and learning new ways to communicate.
We've had a couple of calls that ask what any of us are doing either through our organizations or otherwise to actually support the troops, and we've only got a couple of minutes left. But is there anything that you can think of that peace activists are doing to support the troops other than through words of support?
I believe that the Student Coalition sponsored a blood drive. I talked with someone from the SOS organization about directing people who call in about specific concrete acts they can do toward that organization so that those of us who are concerned about troops can send cards or care packages or whatever else is possible.
I know that on the 7th of March, I believe it is, that there's an event planned here by the Vet Center and a number of counselors in Missoula to get together and talk about the needs that people have, either families of service people or others. And that's a day-long event that's planned, again with the idea of getting ready to begin to welcome the troops home. So it seems to me that people really are going out of their way to not only talk about supporting the troops, but actually doing it.
I think, though, that we have to be very specific and that these things are constructed. Many people, for instance, Jim Parker, I believe it was, mentioned that they were donating blood, but not in the name of the soldiers and not in the name of the servicemen and women.
Well, our time is up tonight. I'd like to thank both of my guests for being here this evening, and thank you for joining us. A reminder that this program will be rebroadcast 1 week from tomorrow, Wednesday, February 20th at 4:30 p.m. Be sure to join City Limits next month when we'll be talking about winter sports in Missoula and the city's role in promoting them. That will be live on MCAT at 7 p.m. Tuesday, March 12th.